So we are now going to be going over the chapter 2, which is responder safety and wellness. It's super important. What you find is that you cannot take care of other people if you're not taking care of yourself. And one of the roles and responsibilities of an emergency medical responder is you are looking out for your safety, your partner's safety, and your patient's safety. And we really need to remember that. So there's a little bit about what the key concepts are. We'll talk about some specific things like in the situation that you're in, scene related, and then also just career related as well. Excuse me. The nice part about teaching at a distance is we don't have to wear masks and I don't have to cover my cough, except for if it like gets on the screen. But that's nasty. Ew. Keep going, Casella. Stop that. So we're going to talk about these topics: scene safety, protection from disease, a little bit about stress, death and dying, lifting and moving, and patient restraint. So those are the topics that I have to try to fit into a limited time frame here. Also, taking care of yourself being a priority. If you get called to like a person's house, the call comes in, man down. Still on the line, husband fell in the bathroom, caller can't wake them up. What are the potential things we need to think about? You're going to a house, somebody's there, they're in a bathroom, they can't wake up. In your mind, so try to imagine what could be some of the risks involved in that situation. Scene safety becomes important. With this, we can see some guys responding, some paramedics. And if you look at the picture, this guy seems like something's wrong with him. We don't know if he's hopped up on drugs, if he's been drinking, if he's hurt, sick. There's something where he doesn't look good. If you look in here, you can see in the background, we've got a little bit of remnants of some alcohol there. Who knows what that means? Next thing we look at is you have to always be looking out for yourself. You need to be a teeny little bit, if you want to say, paranoid. And in emergency type situations, getting called to a house can be actually quite dangerous, especially if it's like what we call a domestic, where people are at the home having a fight or a disagreement. Sometimes really bad things happen. Likewise, you are called to all sorts of different things. If you look at as an EMR or an EMT, you could get called into scenes where demonstrations and riots are happening. You could be somewhere where an accident has just happened, an explosion, terrorism, fights, building collapses. There's so many different things. But when we look at violence, you want to think about that. Just because you're there to help doesn't mean that you're safe. Just because you care doesn't stop somebody who's enraged and angry from hurting you. So if you see signs of violence or weapons or crowds, drugs or alcohol being used, those are all things that could put you in danger. And you just have to go in and realize, like, one thing that I always try to remember is I don't let the patient get between me and the door. I always want a place to escape if I have to, if things change. And that's a thing to think about. You have in the back of your head, you don't go, right now, I'm going to get between you and the door, because if you go off on me, I want to be able to run away. But in reality, that is what I think. You just have to always have that. And if we're in a violent situation, let's say there's a person you're on standby because somebody is maybe suicidal or angry and doing whatever they can. Here we have a picture of this guy. You can just barely see it, but he's got a rifle and he's sitting on the step in this building. Move my arrow over here. Dun, dun, dun. That looks dangerous. You don't want to be like, hey, sir, I'm here as a medical person. I'm here to help you. He doesn't care if you're a medical person. He isn't doing okay, because is it okay to sit on your step with a rifle? No, we already know things aren't quite right. So one of the things we look at is there's two different things. There's cover and there's concealment. Concealment just means that you're not seen, where cover is something that's providing a little bit of protection, like the dumpster that they're hiding in front of. Review question number 9 deals with cover and concealment, by the way, in case you're tracking in your sheets. And so that is one of the things that you want to think about is sometimes just distraction will allow you to retreat and get out of there. So you just have to realize your safety is super important, and you might have to run sometimes. You have to get out of there if it seems unsafe. There's no reason to stay somewhere that gets unsafe. For us as medical, we're going to really rely on law enforcement to protect us and do what they can to secure unstable patient, for example. That's one hazard. So violence, a person that's not in the right mind, either from anger, rage, mental illness, drugs, um, you name it. Then we have other scene hazards, for example, hazardous materials. If any of you have a fire background, you can see in this, the thing that says 1866, that's an emergency placard. And they've come up with, the Department of Transportation has come up with a system where you can look this up actually in a book and find out what type of material is in that tanker truck there. We know right away just by looking at it, it's red. That looks like a warning. And there's fire. Do you want to smoke near this thing? No. If that thing rolls over, do you want to be close to it without protective equipment? Even with protective equipment, do you want to be close to a tanker truck that's burning? Not as an emergency responder, you don't. So we want to look at the placards. If there's down power lines, unstable vehicles, confined spaces, any of those kinds of things could be seen hazards. The way to look at that tanker is the way that you can see the person in the ambulance. They've got binoculars. They're looking at a distance. John Winkleman, he's one of the, or John Lindstrom, he's one of our people that speaks sometimes to class about hazardous materials. He calls it the rule of thumb. The dangerous thing in you should be able to hold up your thumb and cover it up with your thumb. Otherwise, if you can see it when you hold up your thumb, you're too close to it with those hazards. So anytime we're dealing with those, realize don't just run into it. So that's scene safety. We also have to protect our bodies from disease. Now that's become very prevalent right now because of COVID. We're dealing with probably an airborne disease. That's why we wear masks and face protection when you're close to people. Prior to like a pandemical type thing, one of our biggest concerns is blood. And in this picture, you can see this guy's got abrasions, and without touching him, person on the left was giving him some dressings that he's controlling his own bleeding. The EMT or paramedic shows up. She's getting her gloves on. Before she comes in contact with the patient, she's going to have that protective barrier between her and the patient. So that's one of the ways we do it, is with personal protective equipment. We treat everybody's body fluids as if they're potentially infectious. We also treat ourselves as if we are potentially infectious to our patient also. So when you take your precautions, it's protecting them from you, but you from them at the same time. Most importantly, you, but doing things properly, you're protecting your patient as well. So those are our standard precautions. If you're keeping track, that would be review question number 8. And that's treating all body fluids, airborne droplets, as if they're potentially infectious. So that means we wear eye protection, face protection. Sometimes we'll wear a gown, gloves, and then also disposing of those materials properly when you're done. If you have lots and lots of blood, it goes in a biohazardous materials bag and it gets thrown out. Like if you have tons and tons of blood, you don't want it to just be out in the normal garbage where animals can pick through it and everything. Another thing we do is prepare ourselves before we respond by being vaccinated, and vaccines will help protect you from infectious things. We're hoping they're just starting to, some US vaccines are being offered to some medical providers, for example, and they're trying to decide who will get the vaccine. Prior to pandemic, we've always had flu vaccines every year that come out. You need to have your hepatitis B vaccination to go to school, and that's a bloodborne type deal. So these are ways we protect ourselves by making it so our body isn't susceptible to some of these common and harmful diseases. So with a combination of avoiding contact with personal protective equipment, using vaccines to help our immune system keep ourselves safe, that helps. So having the proper equipment, and what they'll talk about, like the official term for putting on your equipment is donning it, which is strange, but it's spelled DON. That means put on the proper equipment. Here's an example of someone's throwing up. They're suctioning the airway. He's got eye protection, face protection. This used to seem like a lot of precautions. Now you're like, yeah, that looks normal. What you might even take more precautions if it's airborne particulates. You would want a respirator mask as opposed to just a face covering. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll adapt to what's going on currently around us. Right now, we're very concerned about airborne droplets and close personal contact. So some respiratory precautions become a concern. If it was all something found in just the blood, then we'd be taking different precautions like to avoid blood getting on us. Anywhere along the way, by the way, if you have questions, feel free to ask. Gowns protect you. You wear that anytime that you could get contaminated. Protects your clothes from being contaminated. It's also a good idea you don't wear your work stuff home, right? You change when you get home. You don't sit on your couch with your work pants, for example. I think about like my son works at Freddy's, and he comes home from Freddy's and he smells like Freddy's. And I don't want him sitting on the couch in his Freddy's outfit. I want him to change into some other clothes and take off the shoes that you're working there because you don't want to bring in the grease from the floor, for example. It's the same with infectious things too. It's very common for doctors, nurses, paramedics. They have their work outfits and firefighters, and they have their home outfits, and they don't combine them. Another thing that's important is you need to know what to do if you're exposed to something. If you get exposed to a bloodborne pathogen from somebody, you're supposed to do a report. If you're in the course of working, you have to report it to your employer. If it was like an OEC event, you need to let me or Briz know so we can take the proper precautions for you and document if you've been exposed so we can make sure that you're safe. That's very important. Obviously, hand washing is one of the very most significant things you can do to stay healthy and protect yourself from disease and other people. Before you eat, before you touch your eyes, before you do anything, always wash and sanitize your hands. That becomes very critical. We know how to put on gloves. Now, we've talked about violence. We've talked about disease and illness. Another thing we need to realize is stress, everybody, is something that has an impact in our life. And like it or not, if you're going to deal in the medical field, you're going to be dealing with people in stressful situations. You're going to be dealing with problems. Like people don't call you because they're happy. They don't call you because they feel good. They don't call you because everything's awesome and they just want to come over and do a barbecue. They're calling you because someone's dying, like literally dying or dead. They're in pain. They're super sick. They're concerned. That's what we do as medical people. We help try to bring back control to things that are going chaotically. Stress, it's there. If you don't like stress, you might want to stay in the medical field, but pick a different area than dealing with people who are going through stress. Just a thing to think about. I'm not trying to push you away from it, but just realize it's normal. I know a person that was an EMT. They're like, oh, this thing happened and it was so hard and it was so stressful and it was this. And it's like, hold on just a minute. You do recognize that you're in a job that's supposed to be normal. You don't go because things are good. So stress is important to learn how a body reacts to stress, but also realize it does affect all of us. And you can't really get by too long without realizing that stress gets you. All of us have been stressed since March of last year. Really, we have. And it takes an effect in our lives in all sorts of different ways. It's kind of a little picture of working in that medical field. I mean, obviously, imagine that let's say you are either of these people and you've got this little toddler who looks in bad shape, right? They've been in a building explosion or a fire. They're maybe not doing too well. Who knows if they need CPR in this particular picture? Who knows if they're conscious? We know they're potentially gasping for air. That's going to be tough. I put a really sick and critically injured kid in any of your hands. I don't care if you don't like kids. you're going to be emotionally impacted by it. Um, you're dealing with life-threatening situations and seeing stress of patients, being around families and bystanders. Boy, I'll tell you, it's one thing to be in a situation where something's bad on a person, but when then you get the family involved and you see their reactions to what happens, it's even harder. And you might be in a spot where a patient or a coworker dies when you're with them. You might have multiple patients. You might have pediatric patients. I mean, these are some of the stressors that could be out there, and it can affect us. And so, one important part of all responding and being a care provider is realizing self-care is important. And people remember that even as a student, your self-care right now is important. So if you're dealing with stressful things in your life, whether it's a recent loss, something that you responded to, just life in general, recognize it for what it is. You got a lot going on. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means you have so many things affecting you that now and then, even sheer determination isn't enough. Now and then, all of us need a little recharge or need a little help. And so, some of the signs of stress in a person's life can be any of the things you see listed on the screen here. Whether it's I always thought it was real interesting that indecisiveness is actually a sign of stress. That means all the time I'm stressed because I can't decide what I'm ordering for a meal. Like I'm one of those social orderers. Like if we were all at a restaurant together, first of all, wouldn't that be fun if we were all eating together? But I always like to know what other people are ordering, even if I don't want it. I just like to know what people are ordering. A little indecisive. But this one, if you're under tons of stress, it can be hard to make decisions and realize that it's not necessarily something wrong with you. But all these different things, it could be any of these factors that deal with it. And realize every single person experiences stress. And it's important that we make some lifestyle changes. There are times where you are going to probably need professional help. And I really want to remove any stigma from that because there's no reason why that it makes you weak to ask for help. If you right now had diabetes, would I shame you? Would I say, oh, you can't handle your insulin? Ugh, you don't produce enough insulin. You're so weak. Hell no, I wouldn't. I'd say, oh, okay, you need insulin. Let me help you out. Or, well, no problem. You're diabetic. Of course you need insulin. Well, if we're struggling with stress or we've got something going on in our life or we're dealing with mental health issues, well, holy smokes. Why does that matter? It's no different than anything else. So if you're going to ever see me advocate for anything, there's no shame at all for asking for help. So please remember that. I don't care what people are afraid of or think about it. It's like, get over it. We all struggle now and then. And it's not always that you're stuck there forever, but when you're in those times, it feels like you're in a hole you can't get out of. And that's where we need each other or a professional. And I want to just say that sometimes in our own lives, we need that. And there's also times even in like relationships and families, we need that. Sometimes our family needs therapy. Sometimes a marriage needs therapy. Big deal. You get through it. You work through it. So please don't let that be a barrier. Sometimes it's you reaching out to another person saying, hey, I think you need help. Let me help you get help. But recognize that. Going back to lifestyle changes, when you know that you have stressors, you need to make some plans in your life so that you don't get overly stressed. Or I should say that you can deal with it in ways that work for you. For example, I could drink alcohol every single day because I'm over 21, right? Should I drink alcohol every single day? If I have a really bad day, maybe drinking something might make me feel relaxed. Is that good? If I get really mad and I'm like, I'm just gonna drink my things, my cares away. That becomes a huge problem because it doesn't make it go away. It might temporarily make it go away, but whatever got you to feeling frustrated didn't go away just because you consumed a medication. Or let's change the topic to sleep. You can't sleep. Well, I'll just take Unisom. Unisom, it's safe. It's over the counter. It'll help me sleep. Well, if you can't sleep, there's probably some things maybe that's telling you, like, yeah, you might need exercise, you might have things you have to get done, you might need to talk to somebody. Just taking something for it now just sort of complicates things. So kind of a own lecture on its own, but I just want to say this. We all experience stress. It's being human. Doesn't make you weak. Just recognize sometimes you need help. You need to get help or you need to give help. The other thing worth mentioning is we are going to deal with death and dying in the medical field. Also, I do hate to break this to you, but in our lives, we have to deal with death and dying too. And sadly, some of us are right in the thick of that right now, either losing family members or loved ones. And it's hard. And I have to kind of like, as I talk about this, I want to be sensitive to each and one of you in the room that I am sorry if you're going through any of that. I want you to go on a quick journey with me, and we want to pull ourselves out of where we are right now and just understand what kind of one model of how what people go through dealing with death and dying, just so we understand what to expect when we're dealing with a person, like a patient who's confronted with death and dying. Also, like when we are dealing with death and dying in our life, what are some normal responses? And then you can like put it back on and say, oh, but this is what I'm going through, you know. But let's just kind of clinically, if you will, look at death and dying for a second. Obviously it can be very, very difficult and stressful. Death is inevitable. I mean, we no one gets out alive, right? But we might deal with a patient that is dead. They might die while we're with them. They might have died before we get there. Sometimes you'll get to a spot where maybe it was a person in a house. They haven't gone to work for a few days. There's a welfare check. Police come in. Person's unresponsive. You might see tissue decay. Well, that's a good indication that they're not alive. Or rigor mortis. That's on review question 6, by the way, where somewhere within the early death, their body is stiff. Okay, that's all the muscles are stiff, called rigor mortis. Eventually that goes away, but that is a sign of death. Or signs that are incompatible with life, like they're decapitated, the actual brain matter is exposed and out, or you just can 100% tell like what happened to them, they're not alive. So sometimes there's that kind of shocking things. But when I was saying like let's suspend what we know, there's these different stages of grieving that people go through, and there's different ideas and thoughts about death and dying, but this is one particular model out there that seems to make some sense. This is some common things that people go through. To an extent, they're in a certain order as they come up, but we are all so unique in our lives, and grieving is so unique that it's not this prescribed, beautiful. First, you're going to be in denial, then you'll get angry, then you'll bargain, then you'll be depressed, then you accept it. You know what? I look at it as it's kind of the journey, but there's things that bring back right back and reset you. But one of the very first things a person deals with when they hear about death or they're dealing with death or a loss, it could be loss in life too, is denial. Like, no, this can't be. You almost have to hear it again, or you're hearing it, but you're not getting it. And then there can be an anger response. And the anger is at the world. It can be at a higher power. It can be at the person that's injured or sick or dying, or mad at yourself. When we look at bargaining, it's, but if only they had worn their seatbelt, why didn't, like I lost a cousin, and he was amazing, and he didn't wear his seatbelt. And if he had only worn his seatbelt, he'd be here. His name was Hunter. And I still bargain now and then, like, if only he had done that. Different times a year, different smells, different things bring up those memories, and all of a sudden you're right back into certain things. So realize it's not, grieving is unique to everyone. There's some common things we go through them in different ways. Some people, as soon as they hear bad news, they're yelling and screaming and wailing, and other people, you don't hear anything. They're quiet and they process it inside. I'm an inside processor, okay? I can have a million different reactions, and you'll look at me like, "What is your problem? You don't respond to anything." It's like, that's it's inside, you know? Um, Not to be all difficult or anything, but I remember when I was a kid, like 6th grade, my parents, that's when my parents divorced, and I remember my dad coming in the morning. He says, "Guys, I have 2 brothers. I need to meet with you after school. We need to talk." We're like, "Ooh, what's that all about?" So we have a talk, and I remember a lot about it sitting on the couch, and he told us how our life and our family was changing. And he was done. And then I says, "Okay, well, can I go out and ride my bike?" And he didn't understand how minds work, but I understand because my dad was grieving too. But I I think you might understand without me having to explain why I wanted to ride my bike. But my dad said, "Son, this is something that's going to affect you for the rest of your life, and you want to go out and ride your bike, and what is your problem?" And I didn't fight him back. I just was quiet. But inside, I was like, "You just don't understand, Dad." But I don't think at 6th grade I could explain that to him. I just needed space to process it and think about it. Didn't mean it wasn't important to me. It just meant I'm not going to be like, "No, don't do it." Inside, I was that way, but it wasn't the same. So recognize people will react like going off, or they'll be quiet. Sometimes people laugh, which is a strange thing. It doesn't mean they think it's funny, it's just the way their body reacts. I actually happen to be an inappropriate laugher. There have been some times I got in trouble and I started laughing, in particular trouble with my mom. Or another time, like I remember being at my friend's house and his big brother was beating him up while I was there, and I was laughing. He's like, "What? What? You gotta help me out here. What are you laughing?" And I don't know if you can relate, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, not to be too serious, and I know this is really heavy topic, grieving. Just recognize this. I'm going to circle back to everything. Is that there are actually phases we go through. So realize that it's normal to feel totally out of sorts. It's normal to have those stress reactions, and sometimes time helps. Sometimes talking to someone helps. Sometimes um, asking for help from someone professionally is something we need. Please just realize the importance of taking care of yourself and reaching out to take care of others, because it's important. Your mental health matters, and do things that work to help you. There's a lot of resources out there. So if you're struggling right now, please ask for help. Okay. Please ask somebody. Ask me. I'll just help direct you. I'm not good at helping, but I'm good at directing. Ask a friend, ask a family member, but please always remember you need somebody to reach out to if you need help. Okay. Safety. Now, as we look at safety, the next thing we have is lifting. So the way we handle our body is important. You don't want to hurt your back. The biggest thing that's going to put you out of your job as a nurse, as a firefighter, as a paramedic is to wreck your back. So you right now have to lift properly. Anybody here who does weight training, you have a little bit of a head start on other people who don't, because you know you have to learn proper form or you'll hurt yourself lifting weights. It's the same with moving patients. So in this particular incident, we're lifting a person into an ambulance. The guy on the right, he doesn't have the best posture. Like he's bending over, he's got one hand on top, he's trying to lift up the bottom of the gurney. We'll talk about how to do that properly eventually. Um, it's okay, but it's not great. You know, now the ambulance is doing some supporting here, but you got to look at your body mechanics to protect yourself, lifting properly. Position the patient for comfort and safety, because you can get hurt. An example, this lady, it looks kind of funny, like she's squatting like that, but it's like a power squat that you're using your legs, not your back. Notice the grip of the hands. It's like this, not like this. If I hold like this on a pipe, can you see my hands at all in the little picture of me? It's only my thumb that is holding that gurney. If I go like this, it's my entire hand and wrist that the strength comes in. So that becomes important. So body mechanics are quite important. Lifting, making sure you do it together, bending your knees. That way, again, you don't hurt your back. You don't want to hurt your back. Then there's urgent moves and there's emergency moves. Emergency move, you do what you can. If you remember when I showed that video at the beginning of the year of the person trapped under the car, and it was the motorcycle that got hit and there was the cars on fire and they just yanked that guy by his legs. Do you remember that? That was an emergency move. An urgent move is, well, we got to move you, but we have time to do it safely. So recognize sometimes an emergency move, we still have to do things in a way that you're not going to get hurt, but sometimes you really got to move people. So if you're at risk of danger of explosion, cardiac arrest, any of those are emergency reasons. There's a lot of ways to move people, like a long axis drag. Review question number 2. Close drag under the arms. I think this is always the classic Hollywood carry a person. That's actually harder than it looks, or else I'm weaker than I think I should be. The cradle carry, but works great with kids. Rolling properly. Make sure you do it as a person, as a unit as you do that. If they're not breathing, they have altered mental status, shock, hypothermia, those are times we urgently move them. And if they're, let's say this person's in a recovery position, that's allowing them drainage for their airway if they're maybe not fully responsive. So those are some things to keep in mind. As far as restraining patients, the thing you should know about restraining patients is it's limited the times that we do this, but there are times where they're a danger to us or other people. You can't just handcuff people, all right? That's a law enforcement thing. Hennepin County Medical Center paramedics, I think, are allowed to carry cuffs. All of them have some different potential soft restraint systems where they can, like, well, for example, if someone gets a head injury, like a brain injury, sometimes they get combative. Somebody's on drug overdose or meth, they could be extremely strong and dangerous to you. Get law enforcement involved to help with the restraints. Follow your company's protocols and what they do. They have to be like a soft restraint. And when the person is restrained, you have to have always monitoring airway. Never do they get put face down, for instance, on a backboard, because they could suffocate and die. And that happens every now and then when it's done improperly. So that's, for right now, all we have to do is talk about that, as safety is important. Do it with people. There's approved things. I actually had approved training once on how to handle like a fight at school. Here's how I handle it. Help, there's a fight. I don't want to get hit. But there are approved ways of intervening when you have to hold somebody. So you'll get trained when you get a job on how to do restraints. And there's so many regulations. It's important you follow your company policy. Don't follow what YouTube says or what you think you should do. Follow what they tell you. That is quite critical. So I covered a lot kind of quickly, did the best I could. On the bright side, I had to be short. Normally in a 2-hour class, I would talk forever and you'd get a little break, but now I'm just about done. Do you have any questions or thoughts?